All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Good morning. First of all, thank you to Rabbi Ari for the weather advisory. Definitely, he's not here. Thank you. And again, Rabbosai, you should just know that text gets sent out. If you saw the timestamp, 5:22 this morning. If you're wondering what Ari is doing at 5:22 this morning, is preparing the coffee. You know, we all go in, Baruch Hashem, and we take and we enjoy, and it's wonderful. But understand that Ari really, I'm happy he's not here because he was shutting down if you were saying, but there's tremendous mesiras nefesh on his part when he does it. So make sure that when you see him, that you give him a tremendous thank you, not just for the weather updates, but for the coffee each and every morning. Ari, on behalf of the entire shir, thank you for everything. Thank you for everything. We really appreciate it. The weather update aside, also just the coffee every single morning. We understand the mesiras nefesh, and thank you for it. Thank you for it. We also thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the year of Tafshin Pei Hey, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shir and Droshos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for Am Yisroel. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Malkie Rosenbloom, in honor of Josh's 40th birthday. Mazel tov, mazel tov. And our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Friends of Josh Rosenbloom, for his, the friends wrote special birthday. The wife wrote the actual birthday, right? It's okay. 40, mamish, a child. Josh, on behalf of the entire shir, we wish you a tremendous birthday. Mirza should be a year of growth, of hatzlacha, of bracha, of continued zechus, and kol mishalos libecha l'tova mea ve'esim shanim tovos. Mazel tov. Beautiful. All right, Tabosai. So with that, let us begin. Of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the zechus of our precious hostages. May Baruch should bring them home, b'shalom and b'karav, and in the zechus of our holy soldiers, may they be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yedehem. Tabosai, with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. An interesting daf filled with just a lot of, at times, random information, but really interesting ideas. So remember, again, we're still steeped. You know, it feels like a little bit, on one hand, it's interesting Gemara. On the other hand, I know I felt this yesterday praying the daf. It's very heavy, constantly being involved in death, right? And just, these are death-oriented. But as I mentioned before, I think when we started this sugya of skila, you know, sometimes being around death is a powerful thing, because being constantly around death could be actually life-affirming. And I know that sounds inherently contradictory, but sometimes when all you're doing is death, and you recognize that Baruch Hashem, I'm alive, I'm here, it's a new day, it's only 5:57 in the morning. The whole day is ahead of me, and it's mine to decide what I want to do with it. In bracha gidol mizo. So sometimes, again, spending a lot of time with death reminds us how much power we have in life. So also with that, let us begin. So we left off yesterday. Tell me where I am. Rabbi Shimon. Good. Okay, so let's do this. Rabbi Shimon Achas Arusa. That one. Okay, one person talk. Tell me where I am.
A few lines up from before it gets wide.
Good.
My Rabbi Shimon.
Perfect. See, that's a gabbai. A gabbai just gets to it, doesn't yell, just tells me where we are, and that's it. Good. Let's go. So good. The Gemara says as follows. My Rabbi Shimon. So what's the position of Rabbi Shimon? Design Rabbi Shimon Omer. Shnei klalos nemru bas kohen. So there are two rules said by Bas Kohen. The Gemara says, 1 second. Bas Kohen v'lo Bas Yisrael. So these two rules were said by Bas Kohen, not by Bas Yisrael. So remember again, the overwhelming ambiguity in all of this is, here's what we know. A Bas Kohen who commits adultery is subject to a different type of death penalty. What's the challenge? The challenge is we have two psukim. One pasuk says skila, one pasuk says sreifa. So we're trying to figure out who is who, right? What is what? So Rabbi Shimon says, so rather, again, the Torah says, rather say that these two rules apply even to a Bas Yisrael. But yet by a Bas Kohen, what ends up happening over here is the Torah removes a Bas Kohen Nesua from the general penalty of Nesua, and a Bas Kohen Arusa from the general penalty of Arusa. Now take a quick look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over Nesua, Arusa Bas Kohen Mechlal Arusa Bas Yisrael. It's in the short lines of Rashi, about 8 lines up from before it gets wide. Arusa Bas Kohen Mechlal Arusa Bas Yisrael Miskila l'Sreifa. So generally, an Arusa would get skila. but Rabbi Shimon says a bas kohen who commits adultery in arusa will get sreifa. Okay, and nesua michlal nesua mechanek l'sreifa. And again, by nesua, so a regular nesua, regular married woman who commits adultery, chanek, bas kohen, ultimately again will get sreifa. We'll get sreifa. So by the way, this all feeds into Rabbi Shimon's rule, or what's Rabbi Shimon's premise? Rabbi Shimon's premise is that, remember, Rabbi Shimon argued on the Tanna Kama of the Mishnah. According to Rabbi Shimon, according to the Tanna Kama, what's the most chomer form of misa, most chomer form of death? Skila. According to Rabbi Shimon, most chomer form of death? Sreifa. And remember again, so much of what we're seeing of Rabbi Shimon's opinion is really forged in this whole Bas Kohen discussion. Because since we see that Bas Kohen is pulled out from the normative framework of punishment, and ultimately, again, given something different, and the different thing that she's given is Sreifa, indicates to us that Sreifa is a different kind of onesh. The Gemara says, just like when the Torah pulled out a Bas Kohen Nesua from a regular case of Nesua to be Machmir, so too, when it pulls out the rule of a bas kohen aruso commits adultery from a regular bas kohen aruso commits adultery, it's also to be machmir. And from here you see also what's the chumrah? Chumrah should get sreifa. So from here you see that sreifa is the most common form of misa. I zomei nesua bas kohen bechlal zomei nesua bas Yisrael. The zomei arusa bas kohen bechlal zomei arusa bas Yisrael. So we'll say this is very interesting, and we're going to see this principle later on. But yet, let's say Edim Zomim comes. So let's say Rachel is a bas kohen. She's about to marry Ruvain. Right? It doesn't matter what Ruvain is. He's a kohen, he's not a kohen. We're going to see it makes absolutely no difference. Witnesses show up and they say, we saw Rachel commit adultery. Then it turns out that halacha l'maisa, they lied. Or I should say, another set of witnesses came along and said to the first set, you could not have seen what you proposed to have seen. Why? Imona hayusam, you are with us. Edim zomin. The Bible said, generally, what's the punishment for Edim zomin? What's the punishment? Right? Kasher zaman, reciprocal punishment. Here is the chiddush. Even though a bas kohen gets a unique punishment for adultery, i.e. sreifa, that's unique chumrah for her, Edim zomin do not get her unique punishment. Instead, Edim Zomamin get whatever a normal adulteress would have gotten in that scenario. So a special halacha, we'll see the drasha for that in just a little bit. So again, the unique punishment only goes to the Bas Kohen herself, does not go to her Edim Zomamin. Tanra Banon, Ubas Ish Kohen Kisecha, and again, the Torah says over here, if you look at Rashi, it's the first wide line, Zomamin Nisua Bas Kohen Michlal, Zomamin Nisua Bas Yisrael, Bechenek, Shalahotzia Kosav Ella Osa Levado, Dichsiv Hi Ba'ish Tisarif V'lo Ba'alav V'lo Zomel. So we're going to see, only she gets Sreifa. Only she gets Sreifa. The Edim Zomin will get, interesting, they'll get punished, but they get the punishment for we'll call normal adultery, which would be chanek, strangulation, and not sreifa. Fascinating. Okay, so let's go back to a little bit. Tana Baron. We'll say we are Nunam base 50b, 3 lines into the wide lines. Tana Baron. Ubas ish kohen kiseichel. Right, if a daughter of a kohen will commit adultery, yachal afilu chilulu esa Shabbos. So we'll say, so the lashon of the pasuk is very interesting. It's bas ish kohen kiseichel. If the daughter of a kohen will profane herself. So the Gemara says, okay, profane, maybe it means that she was mechalel Shabbos. Maybe the Torah is telling us that maybe a bas kohen gets sreifa even for just desecrating Shabbos. Talmud Omar liznos. Therefore, the pasuk adds in the word ultimately against nos, immorality. The Torah is talking about again a profanation that occurs. That is, I believe it's a word, right? The profanation or profanity that occurs as a result, ultimately again, of immorality. Dichsev, right? So the Gemara says, "Yachol afilu pnuya." You might have thought maybe it's a bas kohen even if she's single. Ne'amar kan avia, v'ne'amar lahalon avia. So we'll say it says over here avia, and it says in the second pasuk, "V'hotzi esanara al pesach beis avia uskalua." Znos im zikas abal. Just like in the first pasuk, it's talking about znos of zikas abal, which means immorality where there's a husband involved, right? Again, maybe not nisuin, but at least erusin. Afkan znos im zekas habal. So to over here again, there's znos with zekas habal as well. O eino omer avia el hotzies kala adam. Maybe when it says avia, it means that when is a bas kohen subject to sreifa? when she commits adultery, maybe with her father, right? Maybe it's only incestual adultery that's problematic. Kishu Omer he Michaleles Havi Omer Kol Adam Amar. When it says he Michaleles, ultimately again that comes to include no adultery with anyone. Okay. Ha Ma'ani Mekayim Aviha. So we'll say so Ha Ma'ani Mekayim. So what at the end of the day, what do I come out with? So the Gemara says, sorry, Ha Ma'ani Mekayim Aviha. Nemar Kan Aviha v'Nemar La'alan Aviha. It says over here Aviha, and it says in the second pasuk Aviha, Ma Lahalon Znos Im Zekas Abal. Just like over here, it's Znos, it's immorality with a connection to a husband. Afkan Znos Im Zekas Abal. Where it says, okay, Imal Lahalon Na'ara V'Yarusa. Afkan Na'ara V'Yarusa. Well, so here's the difference. So remember again, the Torah speaks about the idea ultimately again of a nara, a bas kohen who's a nara, humurasa, right? V'hotziyas a nara pesach beisaviyah. So we're trying to apply anything that's stated in the second pasuk to whatever is stated in the first pasuk, which talks about sreifa. So maybe if we're comparing psukim, just like the second pasuk is talking about a girl who's a nara, which of course is a particular stage in her physical development, and she's an arusa. So to by sreifa, she'll only get sreifa if she's a nara and she's an arusa. To which the Gemara says, how do we know? Nesua bogeres? Afkan nara v'him urasa. Nara v'hi nesua. How do I know that if she's a nara but she has nisuin? Or bogeres v'harusa? She's a bogeres, right? She's an adult, full adult, and she's an arusa. Or bogeres v'hi nesua. Or bogeres is afilu hiskina. Even if she's a much older woman, 79, how do I know that if she's a bas kohen who commits adultery, she's subject to sreifa? Talmud Lomar, ubas kohen mikol makom. Therefore, the Torah uses a more generic lashon of bas kohen to tell us whoever is the bas kohen, whatever tzura she is, a nara, a bogeres, a nesua, an arusa, it doesn't make a difference. This is the punishment handed down to a girl who is, or to a woman who is a bas kohen who commits adultery. So the Gemara says, bas kohen, so bas kohen, top of the Nal, 51 Both say, Ainli ella shenises lekohen. So both say, here's what's interesting. The Gemara assumes over here that a bas kohen, the fact that it's referring to her as a bas kohen, maybe means that she also married a kohen. Right? Maybe it's a bas kohen who married a kohen. Ainli ella shenises lekohen. Nises lelevi, or Yisrael, or Oved Kochavim, lechalal, lemamzer, lenesin minayin. How do I know that the truth is the unique halacha of a bas kohen who commits adultery and her being subject to streifa? How do we know that halacha lemaisa, no matter who she married, that she's subject to streifa? How do we know that? In other words, it was like, if you look at the list here, the list is very interesting because who's included in this list? So obviously, again, a kohen levi Yisrael, but also psulim. Even in a sin, even in a marriage. By the way, I'll tell you what I love most about Daf Yomi. Well, I love everything about Daf Yomi, but one of the things that I truly treasure about this is, as much as sometimes it is frustrating, not to necessarily, for myself I'm talking about, have retention over all the details of Daf. Along the journey, you pick up like yisodos that stick with you. So remember again, one of the famous machloksim we had is, do we say kiddushin tovsin b'chayve lavin? Right? If you marry someone who you're not allowed to marry, does the kiddushin work? So there's the famous machmir sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds kiddushin einan tovsin b'chayve lavin. So if you try to marry someone you're not allowed to marry, even if they're only prohibited to you by a lav, Rabbi Akiva says marriage does not work. We don't paskin that way. We hold kiddushin einan tovsin b'chayve misa. Right? A man tries to marry his sister, not going to work. Try to marry another man's wife, it's not going to work. But if a woman marries a mamzer, right, or in a sin or a chalal, so it's a law. And every moment during the marriage, there's a prohibition, but the marriage itself works. So how do I know that even if this woman is married illegally, but nevertheless, again, if she's a bas kohen, that she's subject to sreifa? Talmud Lomar, ubas ish kohen, afa pisha ina kohenes. So I'll say, interestingly enough, because this halacha applies to the daughter of a kohen, even if she herself is not a kohenes. Right? In other words, even if she herself has kind of compromised her status either by marrying out of the kahuna or ultimately, again, even by marrying illegally. Okay? He b'sreifa, ve'in ba'ala b'sreifa. So it's very important. Furthermore, just like we saw before, so this unique halacha, this unique punishment of sreifa for a bas kohen who commits adultery is dafka a din in a bas kohen, in the woman herself. it does not apply to her adulterer. Now again, he's killed, right? He's also death penalty, but he doesn't get her unique sreifa penalty. So the Gemara says as follows. See, he b'sreifa vein bala b'sreifa. First white line, he b'sreifa vein zomameh b'sreifa. Similarly, again, she gets sreifa, but ultimately, again, the edim zomamin do not get sreifa. So again, I will say this is what we saw before, that halacha l'maisa, this unique punishment was dafka for her and not for anyone else. Not for anyone else. Not for the edim, not for the bal. Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Esaviha b'sreifa veschameha b'skila. So Rabbi Eliezer makes a very interesting statement over here, right? He says that with her, now we'll just read it and then we'll have to see exactly what it means. With her father with sreifa, and with her father-in-law with skila. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Mar, Yachal afilu chilul Shabbos. So again, we don't know exactly what that statement actually means. Remains to be seen. Amar Mar, Yachal afilu chilul Shabbos. So the Gemara says, I would have thought that even if she just violates Shabbos, because remember again, about the lashon of the pasuk that we keep on referencing is ubas ish kohen ki seichel. Seichel is a lashon of chulin, right? Profanation. So I might have thought that again, even if she just profanes Shabbos, she's subject to sreifa. So the Gemara says, afilu chil Shabbos. Wait a minute. Chil Shabbos is bas skilhi. But everybody knows that. Everyone knows that chil Shabbos is skila, right? Chil Shabbos is not sreifa. So Amarava Hamani Rabbi Shimon. Who is this? This is Rabbi Shimon. Damar Sreifa Chamura. Rabbi Shimon holds that Sreifa is more Chamur. Saladai Chamina. So also listen to this. You might have thought as follows. This is very interesting. Saladai Chamina. Hoil va'achmir behu rachamana bekahani. Drabi be mitzvos yiseros tidon b'Sreifa. This is fascinating. The Gemara is suggesting maybe what the Torah is introducing to me is something dramatically different. Maybe the Torah is introducing to me that Kohanim in general have a totally different punishment system. Right? Why? Because since Kohanim are put on a spiritual pedestal, since they have additional mitzvos, maybe just the ante is much higher by Kohanim. And since halacha l'maisa, again, they have what they call mitzvos yiseros, they have all of these additional mitzvos that perhaps even for any avera which carries a death penalty, halacha l'maisa, again, she should get sreifa, or they should get sreifa, right? And therefore, even if she is mechal Shabbos, she should get sreifa. Kamash malan no that sreifa is dafka adin in adultery and not by anything else. So the Gemara goes right there. So Maishna mine didei. So the Gemara says, I would have thought as follows. So we'll say, so again, what exactly? Maishna, if you look at Rashi actually right across. Maishna mine didei le'inyan Shabbos lama yachmir la ben akevas yosem ben eschem. So we'll say, so just understand the havamina that the Gemara just put forward. The Gemara just put forward the havamina that maybe a bas kohen who's mechal Shabbos should get sreifa. That's the Havamina. Why? Because since Kohanim have so many additional mitzvahs, maybe she has a heightened level of sanctity, and therefore even for Chil Shabbos she should get sreifa. There was, if you notice, by the way, the Havamina was for who? The Havamina was for women. A Bas Kohen should get sreifa for Shabbos. But the Havamina was only a Bas Kohen and not Kohanim. But why would you suggest sreifa for Chil Shabbos for a Bas Kohen and not sreifa for the Kohanim? What's the pshat? Well, this is very interesting. He gave in the lowest shtaya Shabbos legaba ema tidun b'sreifa. This is fascinating. Kohanim already themselves have a shtickle, I'll call it dispensation when it comes to Shabbos. Now, I have to be careful with that word. Not really dispensation, but rather, again, Kohanim, remember, are permitted to offer up karbanos on Shabbos. So we already see that Kohanim male Kohanim have a different relationship with Shabbos. Right? Now, obviously, again, they still have to keep Shabbos, but obviously there is this unique type of dispensation that they have for avoda that obviously only applies to men, doesn't apply to women. So I might have thought maybe halacha l'maisa, again, maybe only the din of sreifa by Chil Shabbos should apply to her, not to them. Kamash Malan, no. Kamash Malan, again, for Chil Shabbos, the penalty is always skila for everyone. Doesn't matter Kohen, non-Kohen. Good. Yachal afilu pnuya I might have thought, Yachal afilu pnuya, I might have thought that even if the Bas Kohen is single, maybe she should be subject to sreifa for adultery, to which the Gemara says, Haliznos ksiv, but it says liznos. It says nos. To which the Gemara says, maybe it's Kid Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar, Panoi Habala Pnuya, Shalol L'Shem Ishus Asa Azona. So what's the very interesting? Rabbi Lazar holds that even two single people who engage in a sexual relationship, that relationship makes a woman into a zona. Now that's not he's using zona as a descriptive halachic term, right? Zona means someone who a Kohen is not allowed to marry. So the point over here is Rabbi Lazar holds that halacha l'maisa, even single people, right, engaging in a sexual relationship is prohibited. Or maybe it says avia. Maybe the reason why the pasuk says avia ultimately is what? Is to go ahead and say that maybe it's only incestual adultery that is punishable by sreifa, but not by other men. To which the Gemara says, "Elamaini hu shezin samei avia." So the Gemara says, "What are you talking about here?" So we're talking about a case over here where she was mizana, she was erisin or nisu with another man, and she had znus with her father. That's the case you want to talk about. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, my area bas kohen afilu bas Yisrael nami. If that's the case, of also bless you, then the punishment should not be dependent on whether or not she's a bas kohen. The same halacha would apply even if she's a bas Yisrael. The Amar Rava Amar li Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abdimi Asya Heina Asya Zima. We will say we make a gzira shava of Heina and Zima. And Zima. So we'll say ultimately again to compare the penalty for a bas kohen who commits adultery to incest. And just like the punishment for a bas kohen who commits adultery ultimately is sreifa, so too the punishment for incest is sreifa as well. That's what the Gemara wants to suggest. So therefore, again, if you're talking about that she committed adultery with her father, so that it doesn't make a difference if she's a bas kohen or she's a bas Yisrael. Either way, the punishment is going to be sreifa. To which the Gemara says, it's tzrich. No, you still require it. Why? I would have thought, kra la'afuki midrava. I might have thought that the pasuk is coming to exclude the position of Rava. So the Gemara says, but since the Torah over here, since the Torah is highlighting this halacha by a bas kohen and a bas Yisrael, kamash malano, kamash lan bas kohen kamash malano. Good. So bas kohen, ainli elashni says lakohen. Supposed to say, now here's what's interesting. Once again, the Gemara is circling back. Now we're just dissecting the brisa that we mentioned before. So we said before bas kohen. I will say it's interesting because like the default assumption of the Gemara is that what does bas kohen mean? Bas kohen means the daughter of a kohen who's what? Married to a kohen. That's like the default understanding over here. So the Gemara says bas kohen ainli elashni says lakohen. I only know that she actually married a kohen. Nises leLevi liYisrael uLaOved kochavim leChalal linasin uLamamzer minayin. How do I know that if halacha l'maisa again she married anyone, right? Yisrael, kohen Levi Yisrael, even someone illegally, a chalal, a nasin, a mamzer. So how do I know that this same halacha of if she committed adultery, she's subject to shreif? I don't know that it still applies. Talmud lomar bas ish kohen. Therefore, the pasuk says bas ish kohen. Af api she'ina kohenes, even if she is no longer a kohenes, mishum, fine, even though she's no longer a kohenes. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. Mishum de inseba luhu lahani lav bas koini. Now I don't understand. The title kohenes, Rabbosai, who is the title kohenes bestowed upon? It's bestowed upon someone, a woman, who is the daughter of a kohen. Now, why does that status change depending on who she marries? In other words, it's like it's a fact of biology. If she's born to a kohen, right, her father's a kohen, then she is a bas kohen. We'll say this would be the fundamental difference. Let's say a man and a woman, right? A man could abdicate his kahuna status. So you could have a man who is a kohen, but if he marries someone he's not allowed to marry, he abdicates that status. He could regain it afterwards, but lamaisa he's out. But a woman by a bas kohen, why would you think that a bas kohen means someone who's married to a kohen? Bas kohen means the daughter of a kohen, independent of who she's married to. So the Gemara says, visu midi kohenes lakohen. Say furthermore, does the pasuk itself say that we're talking about a kohenes who's married to a kohen? Of course not. I would have thought kisecha liznos amrachmana. So the Gemara says, I would have thought when the pasuk says as follows. Who are we talking about over here? A bas kohen. Kisecha liznos. Kisecha liznos means what? She commenced the act of adultery. I would have thought as follows. The Gemara says, what do I take from that? Hanimili hecha de kamaschala hashta. That's when the act of znos, sort of the inappropriate relationship, started now. Aval ha kevan the kamaschala b'kaima meikara. I will say, but maybe, let's say in a case, let's say for example, Rachel, we'll call her Rachel, was married to a mamzer. So I would have thought like this. When did issues in Rachel's relationship, right, in her marriage, so to speak, when did they begin? The moment she stood under the chuppah with the mamzer, right? You're not allowed to do that. So therefore, there's a problem. There's a break in the marriage already pre-existing. I would have thought maybe the only time that there's sreifa for adultery of a bas kohen is when, quote unquote, the znus, the problematic relationship, began now. What if there was a pre-existing problematic relationship in her actual marriage? I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, she's not subject to sreifa under those circumstances. Because after all, we said, bas kohen kiseh leish zar. So ultimately, again, if a bas kohen will marry ish zar, literally means a foreign man, a strange man, meaning not a kohen. Kevan shenivala lapasla. Because we'll say halacha l'maisa, once a bas kohen has relations with a man with whom she's not allowed to marry, ultimately that compromises her status. The Gemara says, "Levi v'Yisrael nami," but by Levi and Yisrael as well. V'shaval beisavei kinurah. Mr. Abbas, remember again, this is very important. When a bas kohen marries a non-kohen, what happens to her kohanic status? What happens to it? So it's compromised. Now again, it depends who she marries. If she marries someone who she's not allowed to, she's done. She's compromised her status and she cannot revert. If she marries someone who's kosher, let's say she marries, for example, a Yisrael, right, or a Levi, then the halacha is she loses certain kohanic privileges. So, for example, while she's married, she can't eat truma. But should her husband die should her husband pass away and she doesn't have children or divorce without children, then halacha l'maisa again she goes back to her father's home. But the point is, we see that when a bas kohen marries someone who's not a kohen, for the duration of, at least for the duration of that marriage, possibly beyond, she's compromised her kohanic status. So the Gemara says, because the Levi Yisrael nami v'shaval beisavia kinurah. The pasuk says that she was married to a Levi or to Yisrael. So when she's married to him, she can't eat truma. But if those guys die, right, if her husband dies, she could go back to her parents' home and consume truma. What do you see from here? You see from here that when she was married, she's not allowed to eat truma. To which the Gemara says, therefore, I would have thought lo sidon b'streifa. Shabbos says, see, here what's happening over. This is fascinating. The Gemara says like this: I might have thought that the only time there's streifa for adultery is when, quote unquote, the problem began with the adultery. That was the first kind of fissure in this relationship edifice. But perhaps when there was some type of halachic pre-existing condition in the marriage, for example, her kohanic identity was compromised. Why would it have been compromised? Essentially, because she married anyone other than a kohen. I would have thought that in that case, there's no streifa. Kamash malan, no. Kamash malan. Even if there was some type of pre-existing halachic issue in her marriage, let's say she married a mamzer. Right? And so that's a real halachic issue. That's a real problem. Right? Not just that it compromises her kohanic identity a little bit, that's a halachic problem. Even in that case, where there is a pre-existing marital issue, halacha l'maisa, if she commits adultery, she's still subject to sreifa. Incredible. Look, Rameir. I will say all this is not like Rameir. Where's Rameir? Say Disanya. Bas kohen sheni says li Yisrael va'achla truma. So I say this is so interesting. Listen to this. A bas kohen who marries Yisrael. So we'll just call her Rachel. Rachel marries Reuven. Rachel comes from a nice kohanic family. She married out. Right? She married just a regular guy, a regular Jew, a regular Yisrael. So what happens? So now she's with Reuven, and what happens? She goes ahead and she eats truma. Now the halacha is, remember, a non-kohen, a zar, is not permitted to eat truma. Again, generally, now we're talking about b'shogeg. Now what's the halacha generally if you go ahead and you eat truma b'shogeg? So the halacha is, remember, there is keren and chomesh. You have to pay back principal plus an additional fifth. So listen to this. Bas kohen sheni says li Yisrael va'achla truma. So Rachel is a bas kohen. She married a regular guy named Reuven, a Yisrael, and she accidentally ate truma. Which we'll say, you can see that, by the way, right? It must have been a case that didn't happen infrequently, right? The girl who grew up in a kohanic home comes back to her parents, right? Not to her parents. There could be truma that's out. She eats the truma. So what's the halacha? So the halacha is mishalemes as hakaren ve'eno mishalemes as hachomesh umisasa b'streifa. Shabbos says the halacha is as follows: she only has to pay the karen, and she does not have to pay the additional fifth. and she's killed by Sreifa. Like, whoa. What just happened over there? So there's a lot of information being packed into that line. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. So Rashi says over here, it's in the wide lines, 2, 4, 6, 8, about 9 lines down. Rashi says, Mishalem says, Karen, Techevan delo zochi lo rachmana begava gzela hi etzla. Ve'ena Mishalem says, Chomesh, delav zora hi horil uruuya lachzor im yamus baila v'zara ema. So this is very interesting. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Bryce Chos's opinion that halacha l'maisa, she has to pay principal. Why does she have to pay principal? Because she stole something. The true doesn't belong to her. So that's the principle. She doesn't have to pay the fifth. Why? Who has to pay the fifth in general? A non-kohen pays the fifth. Interestingly enough, she doesn't have zar status. Why not? Because if her husband dies, she can go back to her parents' home and consume truma. So interestingly enough, so she's chayeves for the theft, therefore she has to be principal, doesn't have to pay the fifth. What does it mean that she's chayev sreifa? So Rashi says imzinsa. Okay, calm down, not for the truma. If she commits adultery, then she's chayev sreifa, because again, she's a bas kohen. So there's a number of things you see from here. Really what you see from here is, first of all, the din of bas kohen by sreifa is the din of any bas kohen, irrespective of who she marries. Interestingly enough, even when she gets married, she retains an element of her kohanic status, right? V'haraya, if she eats truma, she only has to pay keren, doesn't have to pay chomesh. Good. Next. Nises lecha min apsulin. Now again, all of this is assuming that she's in a legal marriage. A legal marriage is to a non-kohen. What happens if she's in an illegal marriage? She married a mamzer. So what's the halacha? Mishalem is keren v'chomesh. Then both say she pays keren and chomesh. Why? Because remember again, what's happened over here? When a bas kohen marries someone who she's not allowed to marry, what happens? So both say she takes on zona status. As zona status, she is forever precluded from going back into the kahuna. Once that happens, she's a zar. She's a stranger to the kahuna. She's just like anyone else. In which case, if she accidentally eats truma, it's keren and chomesh. And interestingly enough, umisasa bechenek dev Rabbi Meir. Wow. Rabbi Meir says also she no longer has the status of a bas kohen. Because she no longer has the status of a bas kohen, if she commits adultery, she just gets the regular punishment for adultery, which is chenek and not sreifa. Incredible. So we'll say that is the position of Rabbi Meir. So again, what's the highlight over here? No highlight, but I'm saying, what is Rabbi Meir's position is that when a bas kohen marries someone who she's not allowed to marry, she effectively loses her bas kohen status. And that manifests itself for us in 2 ways. Number one, if she accidentally eats truma, she's going to have to pay keren and chomesh. And if she commits adultery, she's going to be punished like a regular woman. Not sreifa like a bas kohen, but rather chenek, like a regular adulterer. The Chum say, the Chum disagree. The Chachamim say that halacha l'maisa, even if a bas kohen marries someone who she's not allowed to marry, she still retains her bas kohen status. Very interesting. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, if she accidentally eats truma, she's going to go ahead and only have to pay, she has to pay keren, doesn't have to pay chomesh, and if she commits adultery, ultimately, again, she is judged by sreifa. So we'll say, is that not incredible? What a fascinating machlokes. Essentially, can a bas kohen compromise her bas kohen status? Rabbi Meir says yes. Yes, if she marries someone illegal, she compromises her bas kohen status. That manifests itself in the fact that if she consumes truma accidentally, she'll have to pay keren and chomesh, and if she commits adultery, she'll get chenek, not sreifa. Chachamim say, once a bas kohen, always a bas kohen. You can't compromise that status. And therefore, if she accidentally eats truma, halacha l'maisa, only keren or chomesh, and for adultery, she will always be punished by sreifa. Fascinating. So the Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Esavia b'streifa, v'eschamea b'skila. Rabbi Elazar says, with her father, it's streifa, with her father-in-law, it's skila. Now, what does that mean? My esavia v'eschamea, what are you talking about? So the Gemara says, Ilema esavia mehavia, v'eschamea mechamea. So if you're talking about if she commits adultery with her father, it's streifa. Commits adultery with her father-in-law, it's skila. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Ma'iriya bas kohen. Then again, if we're talking about, so I'll say, if we're talking about incest, and then relations with the father-in-law, that halacha does not vary from bas kohen to anyone else. Rather, again, ma'iriya bas kohen, afilu bas Yisrael nami. Bita b'sreifa, v'kalosa b'skila. The Bible says halacha, incest chasrum with a daughter is sreifa, and illegal relations with a daughter-in-law ultimately is skila. That's across the board. It's across the board. Ella esavia b'shus avia v'eschameh b'shus. Oh, interesting. No, what it means is like this. What Amir means is like this. Rabbi Elazar says, rather, aviha means she's in the domain of her father. Chameha means she's in the domain of her father-in-law. Now, what does that mean? When is she in the domain of her father? When is that? Erisin. And when is she in the domain of her father-in-law? Nisuin. The assumption was, I will say, during Erisin, she's living at home with her parents. During Nisuin, it would be common to move in with her in-laws, right? Her husband's parents. So for those that wants to suggest that Allah Lamaisa, essentially when she's in Arusa, it's Sreifa. It's Sreifa, and when she is in a Suah, it is Skila. So the Gemara says, okay, Kiman, whose opinion is this aligned with? Ikarabanan ha'amri nesua yatzal sreifa v'lo arusa. Right? According to the Rabbanan, they hold ultimately it's only nesua gets sreifa, not an arusa. Ikar Rabbi Shimon ha'amar achas arusa v'achas nesua b'sreifa. Rabbi Shimon holds again bas kohen whether again arusa or nesua halacha l'maisi gets sreifa. V'ikar Rabbi Yishmael, and if it's Rabbi Yishmael ha'amar arusa yatzas l'sreifa v'lo nesua. Rabbi Shmuel says ultimately again, Arusa is ultimately goes out for Sefer Nanasua. Eschamea Chaneku. So the Gemara says, so whose opinion is it? Shalach Rabbi Mishne Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Kach Yatzah Shal Mishnah. We'll say, here's how to arrange the Mishnah. The Olam Kirabanon. In reality, it reflects the view of the Rabbanon. Vachi Kamar, that's what it means to say, Kol Shehu Lamata Mimisa Saviha. So this is interesting about say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, Rashi is 5 lines up from the bottom. Lamata Mimisa Saviha, Sreifa, Kilomar Bamisa Shikala Misreifa. So essentially, anytime you have a punishment, right, anytime that relations with a father would have yielded a punishment that is less than Sreifa, Kigo Nesua Dechanek Ba'alma, Hachabas Koyin Bamisas Avia, Kilo Zinsa Me Avia Bisreifa. So we'll say, so essentially, the Gemara says like this, anything, Kol Shulamata Mimisas Avia, anything ultimately, again, that would have been a lower punishment had she committed adultery with her father. Umayni, what's the example of that? Nisua bas Yisrael. Di'ilu nisua bas Yisrael b'chenek, because a regular nisua bas Yisrael will be b'chenek. Hacha b'misas avia b'sreifa. So therefore, again, had she committed adultery with her father, it would have been b'sreifa. Kol shula mala mimisas avia, anything that would have been a step above had she had relations with her father. Umaynihu, what is that? Arusa bas Yisrael. That's the case of not Arusa bas Kohen, Arusa bas Yisrael. Tila Arusa bas Yisrael ba'alma b'skila. A regular Arusa ultimately would be b'skila. But halcha b'misas chameha b'skila. So to over here, if we're adultery with her father-in-law, would have been b'skila. Okay. Maskana Rabbi Yirmiyah. Midi l'mal l'mata katan Rabbi Yirmiyah. So what are you talking about? That's what the Brisa says. It doesn't say l'mal l'mata. Ella am Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says this. We'll say Am days. Am Yirmiyah the olam Rabbi Shmuel. In reality, Allah again, we're going like Rabbi Shmuel, right? Rabbi Shmuel is the one that says that Sreifa is only for a din in Arusa and not for Nesua. What this means to say, Es Avia, Birshus Avia B'Sreifa, V'eschameha Mechameha B'Skila, V'chol Adam B'Chenek. Okay, so this is interesting. Rabbi Shmuel holds like this. Rabbi Shmuel says the way to interpret the statement of the Brisa is as follows. Es Avia means Birshus Avia, which means if a bas kohen commits adultery when she's in the domain of her father, what does that mean? Arusa. What's the punishment for Arusa? Punishment for Arusa ultimately is Sreifa. Bas kohen Arusa is Sreifa. Okay. Es Chameha means she has adultery with her father-in-law. What's the punishment for that? That I will say that the Gemara says is skila. Now that's an explicit pasuk. That's skila. And for every other act of adultery, what do you get? Chanek. So it's interesting. According to Rabbi Shmuel, there's 3 constructs in the adultery model, right? There's bas kohen who commits adultery as an arusa. That's sreifa. There's a woman who commits adultery with her father-in-law. That's skila. And then there's every other case of adultery, which is chanek. Chanek, that's his model. Okay. So the Gemara says as follows. Amarava, Maishna, O idi v'idi mamish, o idi v'idi rishus. It doesn't make any sense. Because essentially what you're saying is, es aviha means that the girl is in the domain of her father, but es chameha means that she committed adultery with her father-in-law. So the Gemara says, Rava says that doesn't make sense. Either both mean adultery with the respective individuals, or both mean in the domains of the individuals. So the Gemara says, Amarava, the only Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, v'kasar Rabbi Lazar, nesua ka'arusa. Rabbi Lazar holds that an nesua is no different than an arusa. Ma'arusa chad darga maskila meskila l'sreifa. Just like in Arusa, we move her, Baskon Arusa, we move her one step higher in punishment from skila to sreifa. Af nesua chad darga maskina la mechanek l'skila. Okay? Incredible. So again, Rabbi Lazar is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, essentially what we do over here is in the case of a bas kohen, we always move her up one level of severity in punishment. So whatever the normal punishment is, we move her up. So therefore, again, by Arusa, normally again she'd get skila. Again, this is Rabbi Lazar, but really, in accordance with Rabbi Shimon, who holds that streifa as the highest level. So we'll take her again from skila to streifa. By nesua, she normally get chenek. We'll move her up from chenek to skila. Okay, Mask Rabbi Chanina, idi Rabbi Shimon, besreifa kamar, ela amar Ravina the olam kirabanon ve'efoch. Right, so rather again the Rabbanon say, Ravina says in reality it's the Rabbanon and switch things around. Esavia beskila, veschameha besreifa. Again, with her father it's skila, with her father-in-law it's sreifa. V'hai de kamar esavia sircha ba'almanaket, and that ultimately again, which we said, Esavia is the Gemara is just employing, or the Bryce is just employing the normative lashon. Okay. Amrav Nachman Baravua. Amrav Nachman Amrav Baravua. Amrav. Halacha kedeshalach Rabbi Mishmeid Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. The halacha follows ultimately again as Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. So I'll say this is incredible. Amrav Yosef Hilchas Mashicha. I will say this is fascinating. So watch this. We're gonna button up this sugya right now. Get a little halacha l'maisa as well. So the Gemara says the halacha follows as Rabbi sent in the name of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Okay. So now the Gemara says, who cares? Essentially, Rabbi Yossi says hilchas al mashicha. Now, what does this mean? So Rabbi Yosef is saying this halacha is only pertinent for the Messianic era. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Hilchas al mashicha. Rashi says halacha zu kishiyavo yemos hamashiach. It's tzrich lanu she'eshivu dalan misas bezim koman. So I'll say this is fascinating. So Rabbi Yosef seems to be saying is Chevra, why are we spending all of this time on this? Right? In other words, this has absolutely no repercussion and ramification for now, which is always fascinating to hear the Gemara say something like that. Consider like how much time is spent on discussions that may or may not be actively pertinent. But again, Rav Yosef says right now we have no ability to administer a death sentence. Right? Remember again, death sentence requires Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin requires a Beis HaMikdash. So we need Mashiach. So again, what was it? The lashon is so beautiful. Hilchas Mashiach. This is a halacha which will apply ultimately again when Mashiach comes. Amalei Abaye El Meato Shchitas Kachim Lo Lisni Hilchas Al Mashiach. So Abaye says, really, Rav Yosef? You can say that so much. So why do we learn Kachim? Right? Why do we go ahead and learn anything about Karbanos? Right? After all, again, anytime the Gemara brings up Rav Yosef, for that matter, Tumantara. Right? Why even bring up these sugyas at all? Hilchas Al Mashiach. It's only relevant for Messianic era. So why bring all this stuff at all? Rather, the Gemara says, Alo Lisni Hilchas Al Mashiach Elo Drosh v'kabel schar. So rather, Rabbi say ultimately again, what's the avodah over here? The avodah over here is to learn and to receive schar. That's why we learn karbanos. That's why we learn tumantara. Hachanami. So to over here again, by this entire discussion, drosh v'kabel schar. I will say this is a very affirming Gemara because I think for many of us, after the last 2 days, we're kind of wondering to ourselves, what are we doing? Right? And we're gonna see the bottom line in just a little bit. We'll do the Rambam in just a few moments. But again, it's almost as if sometimes it's something you struggle with something. It's very affirming to hear someone else who's struggling with it. At least it makes you might be struggling, but at least I know I'm not crazy. So it's interesting because this is coming out in the Gemara. So again, you have Rav Yosef saying, Chevra, what are we doing? What are we doing? It's very interesting. But what are Hilchas Al Mashiach? Shabbai says, what are you talking about? We spend so much time focusing on things that are not yet relevant but will be in the future. So why do we do that? Trosh v'kabel schar. Learn and receive reward for this. So the Pasha Pshat over here is the Gemara saying. Pasha Pshat is that the Gemara is saying that halacha l'maisa, there is a value to learning, even if there's not something immediately applicable to do with your learning. Right? In other words, what do I do with a sugya like this? Okay, so we take a Musar HaSkil that when you learn so much about death, it becomes a life-affirming experience. Recognizing I'm alive, my gosh, life is such a precious gift. I need to do. It's already 6:39, right? I said this last time at 5:57. Look how quickly time goes by when you're having fun, right? And then what happens? And then Lamaisa, now I gotta live. But in a general idea, sometimes I will say we do things and we're not sure about the relevance of it. It may or may not be halachically relevant. But even if it's not halachically relevant, there is a power to engaging in Talmud Torah. Learning Torah is not just about gaining information so that you know how to operate, right? Torah is an operating system, it's true. But I don't just learn in order to know how to operate. I learn because learning fundamentally changes me. Learning uplifts me. When I swim in the Yam Shel Talmud, the sea of the Gemara, I become a different person. Right? I emerge a different I'm not the same person. Oh, but what did you learn? I have no idea. I have no idea. I cannot convey to you one piece of information. But I can tell you one thing. I'm absolutely a different person than I was an hour ago. That is an unequivocal, indisputable truth. I'm different. That's drosh v'kabel schar. Just learn. So I'll say, we translate it as drosh v'kabel schar is learn, you'll get reward for learning. No. Drosh, the reward itself is in the act of learning. Drosh, just learn. V'kabel schar, you will receive the reward. What's the ultimate reward? It's not something you get in this world or the next world. The ultimate reward is you become a different person. I'm someone different now. And because I'm someone different, that will say, what is the greatest schar in the world? The greatest schar in the world is when you feel good about yourself because you feel that you are engaged in a life of self-transcendence. When I feel that I am just pushing forward to becoming the best version of me, that is the greatest schar. So therefore the Gemara says, drosh, sometimes it's just about learning. The kabel schar, and reap the benefit of becoming someone different, reap the benefit of becoming someone holier. Happens to be the Be'er Mayim Chaim says something very beautiful. The Rebbe says as follows. He says there's another vart in Drosh v'Kabel Schar. He says also means as follows. He says sometimes when we learn something, when you learn about something that's not yet in effect, and it's going to be in effect one day, what it does is it awakens within me an anticipatory desire for what is going to be. So the Be'er Mayim Chaim says when we learn about things that are only going to happen in the Messianic era, what does that do? It awakens within me a desire for Mashiach. It awakens within me a desire for a Beis HaMikdash. It awakens within me a desire for a Sanhedrin. The Rebbe says, "Utzmeim alov lomar masai eskel lidabek bo yispar felasos lo nachas ruach." He goes on, "V'nafsham bachla bahem chemdas hazman umisavis lekayim kol hamitzvos kulam b'rega echad." So we'll say sometimes what Drosh v'Kabel Schar means, sometimes you learn something that doesn't apply now. But when I learn it, it awakens within me this desire to have it. Okay, so I don't know about Misas Bezdin, right? If it applies as much. But still, you learn sugyas about karbanos, or you say karbanos in the morning. Like, my gosh, I can't wait. I can't wait to be able to offer up my karbanos. I can't wait to be able to go to the Beis HaMikdash. I can't wait to see the Kohanim wearing the Beit Kuna. I can't wait to walk with my family over the hills of Yerushalayim and in the distance see the beautiful Bayis Shlishi. See, I can't wait for that. So sometimes when you learn things that don't yet apply now, it awakens within me an anticipatory desire for what is going to come. So 2 yisodos in Drosh v'Kabel Schar. Number 1, the act of learning changes us, even if it doesn't give me concrete information from my life operating system. So drosh, learn, and learn as much as you can. The Kabel Schar, reap the benefits of becoming a different kind of person. Or drosh v'Kabel Schar, at the end of the day, learn and awaken within yourself this desire for what is going to come. Awaken within yourself a desire for what the future holds. Incredible. So Gemara says, okay, this is what he meant to say. Hilchasa lamali sugi d'shmeita halacha kamar mai. So the Gemara says, he says, rather what he meant to say is as follows. Hilchasa lamai. Why do you have to go ahead and make this statement of the halacha follows so and so? The Gemara says, sugi d'shmeita halacha kamar. The sugi itself is a pretty straightforward sugya. Like, all right, I didn't think so, but okay. The Gemara says it's pretty straightforward. The Gemara says, mai. So halacha kamar mai. Rabbi Shmuel Tisanya ubas ish koin keisicha liznos benara v'yarusa kasam medaber. So the Torah says as follows. The Torah says, Ubas Koin, right? Kisei Chalaznos. Torah's talking about a Nara, and she's an Arusa. This is Rabbi Shmuel, right? So a Nara is an Arusa. She is subject to Streifa. Atamar benara v'Arusa and Ela Afilu Nesua. You're saying it's Nara, she's an Arusa. Maybe it's only a Nesua. Tamalomar, Ish Asher Yinafes, Eshes Re'ehu, Mos Yumas Hano Eifa Hano Efes. Hayu Akol Bechla Noifa Hano Efes. Everyone was included in the general rule of Noif and Efes, right? Adulterer and adulteress. Hotzi Akasa Bas Yisrael Beskila. Ubas Kohen B'Streifa. Torah removes a Bas Yisrael, says a Bas Yisrael commits adultery is skila, and a Bas Kohen is Streifa. Ma Kishotzi Akasa is Bas Yisrael B'Skila Arusa v'lo Nesua. Av Kishotzi Akasa Bas Kohen B'Streifa Arusa v'lo Nesua. Just like when the Torah goes ahead and pulls out a Bas Yisrael, it's talking about an Arusa. And Arusa Bas Yisrael is subject to skila. So too when it pulls out a Bas Kohen, it's pulling out a Bas Kohen Arusa. Then a Stafkin Arusa is subject to Streifa and not a Nesua. All right, boss, you know what? We'll stop. We'll pick up. Fine. I'm leaving off mid-sentence. I'm going to make a line. I'm not going to get confused tomorrow. So I'm leaving off mid-sentence over here by Zomerman. But I'll pick up and answer with it tomorrow. Tremendous. Shkach Abasai. All right, Chevron, have a great day, everyone.
Cohen and